There's more than a centuries-long history of African Americans fleeing to Paris to escape racism in the United States. For veteran journalist and New York City resident Audrey Edwards, her escape plans went into high gear in 2016 after failed businessman and television reality star Donald Trump started making plans to occupy the Oval Office. In her newest book, American Runaway, Black and Free in Paris in the Trump years, Ms. Edwards writes about how she felt the need to get out of Dodge and her experiences now as a Black expat. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm Ricki Stevenson, your moderator for today. I'm a television news and travel journalist, a native daughter of Oakland, California, and East Palo Alto. I'm a 23-year resident of Paris and the founder of Black Paris Tours, along with my daughter, Dee. Madam Edwards has invited me to join a group of esteemed Black runaways and you to talk about her book and about our lives in Paris. Congratulations on giving birth to American Runaway, Audrey. The title is almost misleading. Actually, it's not just a tale of you in Paris. I thoroughly enjoyed your page-turning, thought-filled, humorous, provocative, witty, civil rights history-packed, deeply personal story of your parents, your mother's loving family from segregated Danville, Virginia, your father's proud West Indian family from St. Croix in the West Indies. Your book is also amazing. So I'm going to be skipping through some of the chapters, but let's start with chapter 1, Punking Out in Paris. I love the way you write, girl.
Thank you, Ricki.
You had taken an overnight flight from New York City to Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport that arrived about 9 a.m. in the morning of January 19, 2017, the day before, I'll just say, Trump was to be inaugurated.
Yeah.
On page 16, you write, all of my red alert instincts, ancient and current, were telling me that America, as I knew it, was now in danger. I would no longer feel safe, which is why I knew it was time to go. Audrey, talk about that moment in time.
Well, when Donald Trump announced his candidacy, I thought it was kind of crazy. Didn't take it seriously. And I knew if by some, I called it fate of karma, he was elected, it would say many, many things about the country in terms of where it is politically and where it is racially. And I just knew I didn't want to be here if that happened.
Now, you had been in Paris before.
I'd been in Paris before. The first time I came was 1980. The cover of my book is actually a shot of me in Versailles, the first time I came to Paris, which was 1980.
Yes. I love that.
Taken by a friend of mine, my college roommate, and it was a camera. It was one of those disposable cameras. Not an iPhone, not an Nikon.
Did you know then that you were going to be living in Paris? Was that the goal?
When I was standing in Versailles in the Great Hall of Mirrors, I said to myself, I'm coming back to live here at the age of 35. I'm going to learn French. I'm going to have French lovers. I'm just going to be this cool Parisian American. It took 30 years. It didn't happen 5 years later.
Did you know at that time that your mother had lived in Paris long enough?
No, I did not. I did not.
Tell us about that story.
My mother was in the service during World War II. She was a captain in the WACS. She was stationed in Birmingham, England, which is where she met my father, who was also in the service. But I had no idea that after she served in England, her WAC unit was deployed to France to also sort the mail. That's what they had been doing in England. And my brother ran across an old newspaper clip when she died that talked about her being in Paris, going to school, taking a course in education. And I'm thinking, I had no idea that she had spent any time in Paris
Yes.
or France.
Yes. Okay, we're going to move along. In chapter 3, I love the chapter titles, girl. Babes in the City. You write the French were not upset about Trump's selection and that they were not impressed by your saying that you were going to now flee the United States and live in France. Mm-hmm. To what do you attribute that thinking?
You know, the French have a much longer history than America does. Their history goes back to medieval times. And they have a long history, or they had a long history of monarchy. So they had seen rulers a whole lot worse than Trump, believe it or not. Because if you could rule by divine right, which is what the monarchists could do, you could kill people at will, you could rape women at will, you could do anything you wanted. You know, you could break, there were no laws that kings and queens were bound by. So Trump, as I met a French woman in a laundromat, she said, we all know he's an idiot, but how long can he be there? 4 years, maybe 8 at the most. In the total scheme of things, that's not a long time. So I think they admired the spirit of my leaving, but they didn't think I was doing anything revolutionary. They had already done that during their revolution.
And yet in 1789, they took, 1789, they went to Versailles, they took Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette and hauled them off to the prison, and then they were sent to the guillotine. Okay, I'm not going to say what I'm thinking.
We could use some of that spirit. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Now, in chapter 4, liberté, égalité, fraternité. That's France's proud national motto. There are a couple of paragraphs that I'd love to have you read that speak to this topic. Here's your chance.
I'm going to read a few paragraphs that just talk about why Paris resonated for me as a Black American woman. What I have always said about the French, the thing I love about them most, is that they leave me be. Leave me feeling free to move among them at will. Tall, dark, striking, not a threat or a thug, or an exotic Amazon eliciting fantasy stoked by all those naked prurient pictures of African maidens in National Geographic. I love that I can show up in the ritziest of places in Paris and not feel my presence is somehow unsettling, unwanted, that I don't belong here the way I sometimes feel I don't belong there in many parts of America, native land of my birth. If I am shopping in an ultra chic store in Paris, for instance, I don't get the feeling that wrong assumptions are being made about me based on wrong and bad stereotypes. Here, I feel my humanity is assumed first, and from that, all other assumptions naturally flow. I am amazed that I can be in the long vestibule of my high-end apartment building, walking behind an older, petite French woman who neither turns around to see who is behind her, nor seems particularly fazed when she sees it's me as I pass her. She simply says, "Bonjour, madame," and keeps stepping. There is not that tiresome, fearful, reflexive reaction American whites so often direct against American Blacks when they find themselves unexpectedly alone with us. The instinctive fear that we are somehow dangerous to them, that we might hurt them.
That's powerful. I'll never forget, Audrey, when I first got to, maybe within the first few weeks, I was walking past an older woman. And she was on a cane and kind of bent over. So this instinctively, I kind of scraped my feet as I was walking past her so as not to shock her. And she turned to me with the most beautiful smile and she says, "Oh, bonjour, madame." I was like, I love these people.
Yeah, right.
Oh, and
right. There's no flinching. She didn't grab her handbag.
The only time I ever saw a woman grab her handbag, the first thing I said to her was, "You must be from the United States."
Was she?
Yes, of course.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Mhm.
You know, I recently found out that, we'll come back to this, but liberté, égalité, fraternity is also the national motto of Haiti. Once
Mm.
the richest colony in the French, what should I say, that in their possession. We'll come back to that though. Okay, moving on. Historians say the first wave of African Americans coming to France was following the 1803 Louisiana Purchase. 50,000 blacks fled Louisiana after Napoleon was beaten by the Haitians, led by Toussaint Louverture,
Yep.
and forced to sell France's richest colony. Now, in your book, you talk about the great wave of African American soldiers who fought alongside the French during World War I. Who were these men, and how did they impact the perception of blacks in France?
Well, the first unit to ship out to the battlefields in France was the National Guardsmen out of Harlem. I forgot the name of the unit.
369. Harlem
Thank you.
Hellfighters.
Thank you, Ricki.
You're welcome. I got you, girl. I got you.
They shipped out first. And what people don't realize, and many people don't realize about France, during World War I, they sustained the greatest losses of any of the European countries. They lost 500,000 young men. And by the time the Harlem Hellfighters got there and were fighting side by side with the Germans, one of the things people also don't realize is that when the Black Americans were being trained in America, they were not allowed to carry guns.
They had to carry brooms.
Right. So here you are sending men to fight a war with guns that they have not even been allowed to train with and practice with in the United States. And they proved to be very daring, courageous soldiers. And the French, one of the things I like about the French is that they understand other people's history. They knew our history. They knew what Black Americans had come out of. And to see these young brothers side by side with them, taking sectors and holding a sector for months, the French not only admired it, they never forgot it. They never forgot it. And I have a friend here who's good friends with the granddaughter of Eugene Bullard, who was one of the Harlem Hellfighters. And I believe
the greatest pilot. He was acclaimed.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In 2019, there was a celebration of the 100th anniversary of World War I ending. The French flew her over to receive a medal for her grandfather.
Yes.
And here it is 100 years later, they never forgot him.
The Black Swallow of Death. I remember I won't even go into my stuff. Stay over here. No, I have to say this. I remember seeing him, I was a kid, and I remember seeing him being interviewed by Eugene Jacques Bullard, the Black Swallow of Death, being interviewed on the Today Show in 1960. And he had been honored by President de Gaulle. President de Gaulle had come to New York to honor him and several other soldiers of distinction. And so here's this Black man with all of these medals across his chest. But guess what? The best job this man could get. He was a pilot. He had been a boxer. He had been Jack Johnson's sparring partner. He owned nightclubs. He was a real impresario, kind of like the godfather of the Black community. And the best job he could get back in Paris, an elevator operator.
Back in the United States, you mean?
Yes, back in the United States. An elevator operator at Rockefeller Center.
Which was considered a good job for a Black man in those days.
Okay, let me get back to you though. But thank you for bringing Eugene Jacques Bullard up. So, in 1920s, Paris seemed to be an extension of the Harlem Renaissance. That time between World War I, World War II, Why was that time so important for Black Americans coming to Paris? And just who were those folks who were coming?
Well, the 1920s was the beginning of jazz era, and it was a time, Europe was weary of war. France in particular was weary, and jazz was fun music, energetic music, and it was a way to take people off the war. And jazz at that time was dance music. It was not the jazz that we know today. It was jumping music. So you had these jazz bands, jazz leaders who were Black Americans, the jazz band, those members were Black Americans, and they were very popular in Paris during the 20s. The other thing that was happening is that you had a number of musicians who were owners and managers of jazz clubs in Paris. Mm-hmm. So they really controlled that industry for about 10 years.
Yes.
Right up until the time of the stock market crash. So really from 1920 to 1929. Mm-hmm. Very influential, very popular. The Duke of Windsor would go to a lot of the Black-owned clubs. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, these were the white American runaways mm-hmm. who hung out in jazz clubs in Paris, very often owned and managed by Blacks. Something that would have been unheard of in America. That was just not ever going to happen during mm-hmm. that time.
Mm-hmm. I love that book, Harlem and Montmartre. And that was the area up in the 18th and the 9th arrondissement. That was just, there were, jumping. So many jazz mm-hmm. clubs. So many jazz clubs. Okay. In chapter 5, I love this one, the captain and master sergeant. Now, in this chapter, you write that your future mom, Captain Bertie Marie Edwards, managed to be seated on stage behind French World War II hero General Charles de Gaulle as he spoke in England, post-war England, in 1945. Now, Audrey, you have to tell this story. This
was my favorite story growing up.
Yeah, it's delightful.
My mother was always a cut-up. She was always a character. And as a 28-year-old, maybe that's where it started. The war was over. Charles de Gaulle had come to speak. There was a huge crowd. My mother takes out her military ID and starts waving it and says, "Press coming through, press coming through." So the crowd parted to let her through. She got to the front of the crowd. One of de Gaulle's gendarmes saw this woman waving something that did not look like a press pass. So he went over to her, asked her to step out from the crowd and show her ID. And she showed her military card. Busted totally. But the gendarme was so impressed with her chutzpah, he asked her to follow him and he seated her on stage behind the podium. It was his seat. He was to sit on stage, but he stood and let my mother take his seat instead. And there's newsreel footage of that particular speech. And my mother would take her whack girlfriends, back in those days, you'd have newsreels at all the Saturday matinees. So on Saturdays, she would go to whatever matinee was playing with 2 or 3 of her girlfriends, wait for the newsreel. And when she saw herself sitting behind de Gaulle, she'd go, "See, there I am, there I am." So, so she told this story repeatedly growing up, and I just loved it because it said everything about her character. Yes. When she was 80, she still, at her 80th birthday, she talks about this young boyfriend, and she ends by saying, "Why does he always bring his wife with him? Everywhere he goes, he brings his wife." So that was my mother, and I can see her charming this gendarme.
Well, it's also
everybody.
It was also about the same time your mother charmed your father. Now, she was a captain,
right?
He was a master sergeant, and they were both named with the last name Edwards.
My mother's maiden name is mm-hmm. Edwards.
Mm-hmm. So,
and my father is an old line West Indian man, and he heard about this captain who had the same name that he did, and he had to meet her. And the WACs who were sorting mail in the warehouse in Birmingham started giving parties because there were all these brothers in Birmingham, and they wanted to meet the brothers, and the brothers wanted to meet the women. So they would give parties. And that's how my parents met, at one of these parties in a mail house that was stacked with mail.
Now, you say mail house. You said that.
I mean, a
times.
warehouse. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Warehouse. Like a hangar.
No, it didn't matter. You said stacked with mail. But we know now, history tells us that those WACs, the Women's Auxiliary Corps, was so significant to the war effort. Talk about what your mother did and the women who worked under her.
What I didn't know until I did research on the WACs, the Black WACs was the brainchild of Mary McLeod Bethune. During World War II, there was a huge effort to recruit everyone into the service. Now, the WAC unit for women had been established in 1943. And it was Mary McLeod Bethune who said to her good friend, Eleanor Roosevelt, you should talk to your husband about having a WAC unit of Black girls. She did. WAC unit of Black women was started, and their job during the war was to sort the thousands of pieces of mail that had not been distributed to the forces fighting around the world in World War II. So the warehouse in Birmingham was literally stacked, mail was stacked to the ceiling in this warehouse. And in 3 months, those girls got all the mail sorted. My mother was in charge of sorting the mail that was going to General Patton's forces in the Mediterranean and North Africa.
Wow, that was of great significance. I have to drag myself along because there's so many wonderful stories you tell.
Oh, thank you,
Audrey. My absolute favorite is about your dad. And this is the one, you know which one I'm going to talk about. And how his father told of dealing with a buck wild, racist, white American soldiers who had arrived in St. Croix in 1917. That was the year the island was purchased by the United States government.
Yes.
Would you please tell that story?
The Virgin Islands, the 3 islands, St. Croix, St. Thomas, and St. John, and I don't know how they were categorized then, but they were sold by the Danish, by the Danes, by Denmark to America in 1917. So here come these white American forces into this trio of islands that the United States now has possession of, and they went crazy, sexually assaulting the women, shooting up Black-owned businesses, because the islands were occupied by Black people. And these were not people that they had to respect in America. However, in the Virgin Islands, the attitude was different in terms of how you deal with this. So my father said he will never forget a group of men meeting in his father's kitchen. He was about 10 years old, to talk about how we're going to deal with these soldiers running wild. And he didn't hear what they came up with, but the next day, a soldier was found with his throat cut. And the day after that, another soldier was found with his throat cut. And that went on for about a week. And my father, whenever he got to the punchline of that story that he told repeatedly, he'd say, and that nonsense stopped. It just stopped. And that's actually my favorite story.
Yes, it is a powerful one. Okay.
I mean, there are ways you deal with violence, and, in the particular case of these men, we give what we're getting. And it stopped. What more is there to say?
Yeah, what can we say? What can we say? I better move hurriedly past that. How did your childhood experiences growing up as an Army brat, moving from bases in Tacoma, Washington, where you and your brother were born, to Yokohama, Japan, to Jefferson City, Missouri. How did all of these experiences shape you today? You were among that first group of school kids to integrate an elementary school in Jefferson City, Missouri. And how did these experiences, I hate to use this word, but I'm gonna, how did this experience color your mind about life in the United States?
Well, one of the things I'll say just overall, I think because I moved around so much, moving was something that was not foreign to me. So when I made the decision to move to Paris, when Trump came in, that wasn't a big stretch for me. When I first came to New York, I think I moved 12 times in 2 years. So moving in and of itself did not bother me. What I experienced growing up and moving so much was just the wide range of experiences depending on where I was. In Japan, we lived like royalty. It was shortly after World War II. The Americans were victorious. So they had all these bases in Japan. Everybody had servants, everybody had houseboys and maids. And then we went from Yokohama, Japan to living like royalty to living with my grandparents in Virginia, waiting for my father to get his next orders. And Virginia was wretched. It was segregated. We had an outhouse. We didn't have indoor toilets. The segregated school was dilapidated. There were no doors on the stalls in the bathroom. And kids were sitting two to a desk made for one child. We had to share a desk and share the chair. And the story I tell about that experience, my little seatmate, who was about 8 years old, same age as me, she was crazy. She came to school every day. She didn't talk. She was disheveled. She looked moody. She was angry. And me, I'm like, okay, I got to sit like almost on top of you. So let me be cool. And then one day she took a pencil and jabbed it through the palm of her hand. I thought it was all the way through. And then she just went wild, jumped up, and ran around the room trying to stab people with this pencil. And I kept thinking, oh my God, I thought the first person to be stabbed would be me because I'm sitting practically on top of her. And the only thing I say it in the book, I said the only thing I could think as to why this child did not lash out at me is that when she looked at me, not only did she see another child's terror, and it was the terror of living in segregated Virginia, but she saw another child's empathy. And she saw a child who's looking at her and is saying, sweetheart, yeah, this is some stuff. This is some stuff. I don't know what you're going through, but I know it's some stuff. And she left me alone.
I'm looking at the time. I'm saying we're going to move along. I have to have you talk about this though. You write that one of the things you most loved about your dad, who lived to be 83 years old, your mom 89.
And they were lucid till the end, man. My father had me write his obituary and read it to him, and then he corrected it. So this is how they rolled.
Oh, wow. We got a while. You said that he retained the kind of intellectual aloofness that made him seem removed from the everyday inconvenience of being Black. That he came from a line of proud West Indian men who tolerated no bad behavior from Blacks or whites. Their feeling being, when they go low, we go lower. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, that describes a lot of my spirit. I have friends who really object to that attitude, but it's the attitude I have.
You got to stop some stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
Let's see, what else I have one more. We're running out of time, but this is so interesting. Okay, I'm going to give you free reign. Riding with Fidel.
Oh boy.
In chapter 11, Fidel, not Castro. I know that's one of your favorites. Yeah. Tell us about your ride with Fidel and how that experience with this handsome, confident, chocolate, well-dressed, dreadlocked, young Black Uber driver in Cote d'Ivoire. Why did that make you cry?
You know, Fidel, first of all, I must say this was a chapter that I feel the ancestors gave to me. Because, you know, when you look at an Uber app, you can see who your driver is. And I saw this brother, and his name was Fidel. And I looked at it and I said, this is going to be a trip. And I just knew it. So I got into his car that was all in black, and he had dreadlocks. I mean, my man was Wakanda bound. And when I got in, I'm like, I started to say, hey, my man, we're going to Wakanda. And then I'm looking at him. He's got on these wraparound shades like Robin wears when he's riding with Batman. He never took off his shades. And for the entire trip, I knew what he was thinking. I knew how his eyes were moving. And I got in, and the first thing he says, where are you from? England? I said, no, New York. And he kept pushing. And he said, you could be one of my people. And when he said it, I said, I remind him of his mother or his cousin or an auntie, somebody familial that he likes, that he loves. And he wanted me to say, I'm from Africa. And when he said it, he said, you're from Africa. And I just said, baby, that was a long time ago. That was a long time ago. And then I said, why did you say that? And then it took me back to the story an uncle had always told about the 4 ancestors who were snatched from a beach in Guinea and sold into slavery in the Virgin Islands. And one of the ancestors, our ancestor, escaped from a sugar plantation, was never captured. And my uncle would tell this story at every family reunion. And we would all wait, even when we were grown cousins, we would all wait for the drum roll, because when he told about the ancestor who escaped, he would say, we were never slaves. We are descendants of a slave runaway. Yes. And we would just go, tell it again, tell it again. So
that is powerful. That is powerful for any child to hear that.
And I heard it when I was grown.
You were never enslaved. Your family was never enslaved. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you know, yes, we're part of slavery, but that ancestor ran away. Ran away.
Another thing that touched me in that chapter was when you talked about Fidel, and you kind of went to what would have happened to Fidel if this young, confident, you know,
because what I did
lived in the United States.
What I did with Fidel was, you know, an arrogant, I have no sense of direction. And all of a sudden I think, because he's rattled me because he's forcing me to think, you know, I'm thinking about my ancestors. He wants me to be African. I know what he's thinking. And at some point I decide he's going the wrong way. We're on our way to the American University of Paris to see a screening, a film about Maynard Jackson.
Oh, yes.
And I'm late. And I'm thinking, we should have crossed the Seine by now. So I said to him, are we going the right way? And he had been cool up until then. And he goes, eh? And I could tell, I said, I saw his eyes like, look at me. But he was so calm. I had really dissed him. And at some point, at a stoplight, he turns around and he says to me, you must trust me. I know what I'm doing. So I felt ashamed. I was embarrassed. And as we continued the ride, I said, this is a brother who is not only upbeat and of good disposition, but he's confident because he knows where he's from. He's Ivorian. He knows his people. He thought I was one of his people. And I said, in the States, and he played his African music on the radio in the car. And I said, in the States, if this brother was pulled over for playing his African music too loud, he could very easily be shot trying to say to the cops, you must trust me. If they said to him, where are you going? And if he tried to say, you must trust me, they could shoot him. Yeah. They could shoot him. And
I
it just,
love that. When you write, Fidel can breathe in a culture that's not aiming at a target on his back.
yeah,
That's powerful.
yeah, yeah. And that was all in a 45-minute ride. And it was very profound because the whole thing to me was just psychic. It was all, you know, I really did know what he was thinking. I did know his eyes were moving. I knew when I had passed that point of, oh, and then at the end, he pulls up to AUP and I'm still like, and I go, we're here? And he goes, he points to the address and I go, are you sure? And he just turns to me because at different times he would say things that sounded like perfect English. His English is really broken. But at this point, he pulls up, he turns to me and he goes, get out.
Sounds
like you're my old doddering auntie. Get out.
Go.
I've had it with you. Get out.
Well, I just want to remind, we have people who are online who want to engage with you. The book is fabulous.
Oh,
I love the fact that it is not, it just covers so much history.
And may I take this opportunity to thank my publisher, Wayne Dawkins of August Press. I know you're out there, Wayne, with Claudia in cyberspace. I would not be here if it was not for that brother who got the book out before the election. So I really do have to give a shout out to Wayne Dawkins. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I just want to encourage everyone who's with us right now that you will be able to jump into this conversation. First, we're going to talk with 4 panelists who are long time. Yeah. Well, there's Audrey's friends and they're long time.
Thank them too.
I mean, 40 years, you know, they're long time expats in Paris. But we will have near the end of, after our 4 panelists have spoken, we're going to give each of you a chance to type in your questions on the social media platform that you're currently using, and we will deliver those questions to our panelists. Let us know if you want to direct your question to one particular person or to all of them, and we'll try to cover as many questions, get to as many people as possible during that segment. That will be the last segment. This is when I get to introduce your friends.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, our 4 panelists. And Audrey, I applaud you. Some people would just take all the time, 90 minutes. Yeah. I know you said that. Yeah.
I'm not that interesting.
See, you amazed me when you said, I really have stage fright. I'm kind of, I'm like, introverted. Oh, please.
Well, this is an easier medium.
Yeah. I applaud you for inviting 4 other longtime Black Paris expats to join in today's discussion of what it's like to be an African-American who bounced from the United States. I like that. I think you would have written that. To live in Paris. Jake Lamar is a Bronx-born native New Yorker, a former Time magazine writer, author of 7 novels, numerous essays, short stories, and a stage play. Jake made his escape to Paris in 1993. Today, he is a professor of creative literature at Sciences Po, one of France's most prestigious universities. They turn out most of the presidents and government officials. So he's going to be touching all of them. And he is a much sought after literary voice in Paris and now serves as one of the leaders of the Brothers Group, and that following the death of our beloved, intellectual, rowdy Brothers founder, Tanny Stovall, who died of pancreatic cancer in 2012. Ellen Hervé-Wright is a greatly respected instructor in the French medical education system. She is also the granddaughter of Richard Wright, legendary African-American author who lived and wrote in Paris from 1946 until his death in 1960. Ellen, who was born in Ghana, has not lived in the United States, but she is now on a mission to expand the reach of her grandfather's literary legacy in Europe, in the United States, and around the world. Welcome, Ellen. Kathleen Dameron is the senior expat in this group, a native of East St. Louis and Los Angeles. She was an 18-year-old college student when she arrived in Paris in 1978. Kathleen, you'll let me know if I got that date right. Over the past 40 some years, she created a diversity training company working with European corporations. She now works as an empowerment coach. She served, I say, as the den mother for the Sister Circle, keeping us all together, hosting events connecting African-American women who are living in Paris, bringing together all people of the diaspora, men and women, for social and major cultural events. And Zachary James Miller has lived in Paris for 30 years, leaving behind home in Akron, Ohio, and a stint in Southern California, where he was a practicing psychologist. Today, Zachary is a writer, producer, director, filmmaker who's putting the finishing touches on So Splendid a Journey, a documentary on the life of legendary 1950s Black artist Buford Delaney, one of James Baldwin's closest friends. Zachary is also one of the founding members of the Brothers Group in Paris, a longtime executive board member of Democrats Abroad France, and back when nobody was paying attention, Zachary was supporting Barack Hussein Obama and later became an Obama delegate at the DNC, bringing others to Obama. Welcome, Zach. Okay, you all have read the book. You all are in the book. Here's your chance. And this is going to be history. That's what's so wonderful. This book is our history. Other than Tanny Saval's book, Perry Noir, African Americans in the City of Light, there are very few books that chronicle the history of Blacks who are currently living in Paris. So let me start with Jake. Jake, what is the legacy you are leaving behind? And what is it that you, well, I guess I should need to ask first, what made you leave New York and come to Paris?
Well, actually, in my case, it all started with James Baldwin and Richard Wright. I was 12 years old when I read Go Tell It on the Mountain, James Baldwin's first novel, a very autobiographical novel about a Black kid growing up in a difficult family in Harlem. I was growing up in a difficult family in the Bronx. And I was so moved by that book. After I finished reading it, I asked my teacher, who is James Baldwin? And the first thing I remember him saying was, he lives in Paris. And it seemed like such an exotic idea to me that someone with a background like that would live in Paris. A few weeks later, I read Black Boy, Richard Wright's memoir about growing up in the Deep South. And I found out that Richard Wright had lived in Paris. So this is starting to seem like a pattern. It was just around the time I was thinking that I might like to be a writer myself someday. And so the idea came along with the idea of wanting to be a writer. It was, well, maybe someday I'll be a writer and go to Paris. It would take 20 years, but after the publication of my first book, I came to Paris thinking I would stay for 1 year. I loved it right away, met fantastic people, and 27 years later, I'm still here.
I remember the first time we met, Jake, and you came to a party in my house. I think I'd been in Paris just a couple of months. And you were with Ted Jones.
Yeah. I think you briefly showed a photo on the screen there. That was a picture that was taken outside the Sorbonne. That is February 1994. So I'd been living in Paris only for a few months. And the people in that photo are to my right, on the left side of the far left of the photo is James Emmanuel, fantastic poet who
the last of the Harlem Renaissance poets.
He lived to be 92, died in 2013. On my other side is Hart Leroy Bibbs, jazz musician and poet, and an actor as well. He's in the first scene of Round Midnight, the movie, the jazz classic, where Dexter Gordon is speaking to an old musician on his deathbed. That was Bibbs. That's Hart Leroy Bibbs. who died not long after that photo in 1994. And on the far side is Ted Jones, the great Black Beat Generation poet who had lived all over the world. My early weeks in Paris, I saw that Ted was giving a reading. I went to the reading afterwards, went up to him and told him what a fan I was. And he invited me to his cafe. Ted used to have regular cafe hours. He had his favorite cafe on the Boulevard Saint-Germain, the Café Le Rouquet. And every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 4 to 6, Ted would be at his cafe and he would just sort of hold court. And he had known everyone from Charlie Parker to André Breton, the founder of Surrealism, just a fantastic storyteller and a magnet for people. And so going to Ted's cafe on a regular basis, I met people who would then invite me over to dinner, and then I go to a dinner and meet more people. And so a social life just sort of sprung up for me. That photo from February of 1994, every year Ted would organize a reading to celebrate Langston Hughes's birthday. And these four wonderful poets, I call them my Paris fathers, they invited me, a kid to read along with them. I'm not a poet, but I read from one of my essays, and it was the first reading I ever gave in Paris. And these men really they just meant the world to me.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to get out of this and let you talk to Audrey. This is one of those rare opportunities where you get to talk to her and tell her what you think about the book and how you are portrayed and how you feel as a Black expat since 1993.
Audrey, I loved the book. I mean, Audrey and I have known each other for a while now. And I loved the idea of the book when you first told me about it some years ago. And reading it was just a pure pleasure. And as I said early in an earlier conversation, if I didn't know you, I'd love the book. And it's the voice of the book that really makes it. It's so witty and charming and spot on. But knowing you as I do, I think it's beautiful the way you captured your own voice so accurately, which is a harder thing to do than people might realize. The book really sounds like you. And I found so many of your observations about Paris just right on. I mean, you really get it, what it's like for people of different backgrounds here. And while I laughed a lot of the time, throughout the whole book, there was one scene that made me cry, and that is the Dairy Queen scene when you're a little girl in the South. I don't want to give it away. I want people to order the book. Anybody watching out there, please order this book. You're gonna love it.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you. See why I love this man? No, I know when a writer likes your work, that is the ultimate compliment. So thank you, because I really respect Jake as a writer also. So I'm very appreciative of that.
And in terms of the how you write about people from the community here, I love what you had to say about our group, the brothers group, that really started with Tanny Stovall, who, as Ted Jones used to say, went on to the ancestors. Tanny went on to the ancestors in 2012, but starting in 1995, I was with Tanny. We were watching the Million Man March on TV. And Tanny said to me, if you were in the States, would you have gone? And I said, well, it depends on what I would have going on that day, but yeah, maybe I would have gone from New York to DC. I'm not so sure. Tanny said, I definitely would have been there. And
what impressed me, Jake, about the group was the fact that 17 years later, these brothers in Paris were still honoring that vision that had been put forth by the Million Man March. You were there that night. Zach was there, Tanny, and Jim, I forgot his last name, but a brother from
Jim Fields.
Hayes.
Yeah.
Jim Fields.
Jim Fields.
Yeah. And I say in the book, it was only 4 of you, but it was such a collection of really terrific Black men. And then I get into talking about relationships between Black men and Black women, and the best men, for the best men were living in Paris. But for me, it was really a great evening to be able to spend.
Well, Tanny, I mean, he felt that watching the march, he felt that he knew all these brothers in Paris, but we never all got together in the same place. Ted Jones's Cafe was the closest thing we had to that. And he wanted to just have that feeling of brotherhood, of getting guys together to have what we call a barbershop conversation. And it started out as dinners, monthly dinners that Tanny organized. He cooked for us. Sometimes you just have 4 or 5 guys. Sometimes you have 20, 30 guys show up. And Tanny did this first. It was monthly. Then it became a little scaled down and more of a weekly happy hour. But this went on for years. And I met some of my best friends in the world. I met thanks to Tanny. They were really beautiful occasions.
And that's where I met you, Zach. I met you at that dinner, I believe. I don't think we had met before then. And you were a filmmaker, but you were also a delegate for Obama. And then you were building, you wanted to build some modular homes in another part of France.
Yeah.
You were very enterprising. I remember you were doing a lot of things.
Yeah, I've always been kind of an entrepreneur. And those were great dinners. And I've had different kind of businesses. And but I just reminded me of Jake reminded me of my first meeting with Ted Jones, and Ted Jones is really how I got into the community at first, was through Ted. I had just arrived in Paris, and I was just walking around every weekend, just trying to, get my bearings and find out, what the city is all about. And I had wandered into a Shakespeare and Company, and I had saw this man in the corner, and he looked kind of familiar. And then it dawned on me, that's Ted Jones. And I knew Ted Jones because as a child, I had read his poetry on stage.
Oh, wow.
I had been an actor.
That's amazing.
I did all this kind of acting in theater, community theater and everything. And I had at one point been toured around the various churches in Ohio reading Black poetry. And Ted Jones is one of the people I had read. And I looked at him, and it dawned on me who he was, and I went over to him and I said, I know you. And he said, well, you should.
That sounds like you.
That's classic Ted.
And we got a conversation, and he invited me to a Jim Haynes dinner, which Jim Haynes had a Sunday, Saturday or Sunday evening dinner every weekend. And I went, and I got to know Jim, and actually Ted introduced me to various jazz musicians, and my jazz documentary, Jazz Life, because of the introduction of Ted to the jazz musicians, that was my first documentary, because when I met the jazz musicians, I decided I wanted to do a documentary on jazz in Europe. And Ted was the
fabulous. Wow.
Now, I know we were having some technical difficulties. Ellen? Hervé-Wright, are you with us now? I don't think she is.
Okay. You know what I wanted to say? Kathleen Sister Circle, I think, has done for the Black female diaspora in Paris what the Brothers group did for Black American men. And I just love your group, Kathleen. Can you hear me?
I am with
Kathleen?
Yes.
Okay.
I can read your read your questions if you write them on the chat.
I think we're having some trouble with Ellen.
Okay.
Yeah, Ellen's muted now.
Okay. Yeah, Kathleen, I wanted you to talk about the Sister Circle because I was so impressed with the women. Well, that's where I met Ellen. That's where I met Ellen at one of your meetings. And I think what has impressed me about the Black American community in Paris is that there is really a concerted effort to create community. And it's a community that affirms who we are as Black Americans and also as Blacks living in a larger diaspora. And I love what you've done with Sister Circle.
And I love it that we can get together. We have Thanksgiving. Sometimes we do Juneteenth, Christmas, Kathleen's always throwing a party. I know you're going to talk about you.
Because she got a fabulous apartment.
That helps too. But it's her.
You love to party.
I love to party. I love to throw a party. And I also just love to have people come into my house and enjoy themselves and share. For me, there's something about sharing the party, but having dialogue and having conversation. And I don't know which way it's going to be on screen, but there's a bookcase there. And the big difference between the brothers and the sisters is that when Teddy was dying, he said, Kathleen, I want to leave you all my Black books. I said, well, why don't you leave them to the brothers? He said, because brothers don't invite people to their houses. He said, you will invite people to your house. They get to touch the books. They can open up bookcases. And yes, and I invite the community in. And Sisters has always organized events for the community, for men, for women. I can see that she's put up the thing, Chez Kathleen, and this whole idea of Parisian chic and African-American hospitality. Mm-hmm. And when I do Thanksgiving, my rule is that everybody has to bring something. And I'm a vegetarian, but I always provide a turkey that somebody gets from the American place. It's not so cheap, it's a real American turkey. And everybody has to bring something. I only do it for Sisters. But I say, if you cannot bring a loaf of bread, then you definitely got to be there. Mm-hmm. And so it's this idea of all of us coming together. And as you know, Ricki, sometimes it takes forever because we have everybody say, what have you been thankful for? And we say, every woman there loved. And just a picture of when Denise Morel comes through, and thanks to Ricki and Black Power Tours, whenever she knows or hears that someone who's a writer or Denise was coming to town, she hooks us up, and I do something so that we have an opportunity as an African-American community to just be among ourselves and talk. And talking with Denise Morel that day, with just Sisters in the room, she told us what it was really like being a Black woman on a campaign to have Black models, Black women, Black men's bodies named. They find the names and they put the names. And Alexandre Dumas, who wrote The Three Musketeers, is Black. He was teased and insulted for being Black during his day. And somehow it just disappeared from the French history books. And Lord knows Americans don't know he was Black. Mm-hmm. And so she was able to put that in the museum and the exhibition. And you're really great, Audrey, because you're talking about being a runaway, but you managed to put in all these important events that happened in Paris in your book. So you talk about how her exhibition really changed something in French art. And you can say exactly more precisely what it is. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy that Sister Circle Paris, we get together to have the behind the scenes look with other sisters. Mm-hmm. And we invite the brothers because Annie's gone, you guys don't have your regular meeting. But the sisters and the brothers were never in antagonism. We were always supporting each other's events. And we would throw some big things. We couldn't come to the dinners on a Friday night.
I was the first woman to integrate the group. I think I was the
second. I was the second. Yeah. I remember being there once.
And then Jake said we had to stop inviting the ladies because y'all couldn't really get down the way you'd like to.
No, I didn't say stop inviting, but I did say we were definitely on our best behavior.
Oh, that's right. Because you didn't want to always be on your best behavior.
We were definitely on our best behavior.
But you know what? I don't know that when you are to me, and I call myself an expat, but I haven't lived there for a long length of time. So I don't know if you are really aware or appreciate how you project to a Black American coming in. The fact that there were brothers meeting after the Million Man March, the fact that there is a sister circle of women, not just from America, but from all over the diaspora, from Africa, from the Caribbean. So for an American coming from a very myopic country to be in a group of sophisticated, cosmopolitan, you all speak 2 languages at least, French and English, something I don't do. Yeah. It's a very impressive community coming from an American community where, you know, we have racial issues that are going to be a big factor in the election coming up. You know, I knew it was going to be bad when I left. I had no idea that it was going to be as bad as it is now. And I just am curious, how do you all, from a distance, see it? I mean, I got the feeling that Americans, especially Black Americans, are in some ways more intense about the political situation than even we are. And again, it's, you have the perspective of distance.
Yeah, well, you're very good in the book, Audrey, about pinpointing certain events, and I think you're absolutely right that Charlottesville was a giant historic turning point, and for me, you know, during the Obama era, Zachary and I were often on radio and TV talking about the Obama presidency and the campaigns. Other people from Democrats abroad were very involved in the French media, just wanting to be part of this wonderful political movement, really, what Obama represented.
How do you see things now? How do you see things?
I made my last appearance the night Trump was elected, and I thought, I can't do this. I'm not going to go on TV and try and normalize this guy by talking about him as if he has, you know, coherent policies or it was a legitimate leader. And Charlottesville really was my worst nightmare come true. I you know, I'm gonna vote like I've never voted before, as John Lewis said. And I think we've got to change this. But I do think it's been a terrible turn in history. Another African American I got to know here in Paris was Ta-Nehisi Coates during his stays here. And he, like you, Audrey, is just very lucid and direct and unflinching in looking at Trumpism and what it represents. And I think we are still living in the Obama backlash. I think the Obama's election just drove a lot of white Americans out of their minds. And
you know what? Ricki and I are now trapped in America because of the dreadful response to the COVID pandemic. Europe has banned us. I think most of the world has banned us. Zach and Kathleen, is Ellen, are you with us? I don't think she's with us. You know, Zach is kind of the political operative in the group. What do you see being at stake in this election?
Yeah, Audrey, listen,
you can hear us?
I tell everybody that more is at stake in this election than any election in my lifetime. Democracy itself is at stake. And we have been working really hard over here. I mean, people don't understand that Americans, when they leave America and they're in various other countries, we're still Americans. We still file taxes, and we still vote, and we still participate. In fact, I have participated more in France than I did even when I was in Ohio or California. So, but this election is really, really special. This election, we've never had a candidate, a president like Donald Trump. And he truly wants to be dictator. And I just said this on French television about a month and a half ago, you know? And the thing is that we are really generating a lot of activity here. We'll probably have the best turnout we've had abroad since we started doing this. I ran other campaigns here. You know, I ran the Obama campaign both times, and we had a lot of, you know, thrilling, you know, excitement about Obama. Here, it's different, but it's excitement because we know our lives are at stake if this man becomes president again, because he truly wants to be dictator.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
It's
Kathleen.
Ricki, you were going to say something?
Kathleen, no, Kathleen.
Oh, Kathleen, I'm sorry.
because when you say he wants to be dictator, he already is. And I think that if you describe how there is no rule of law in the United States right now, for example, there's a law that says that when you're doing the National Convention for a political party, you can't use the public places.
White House.
Right? He used the White House.
Yeah.
It's illegal. It's totally illegal. But it was used. It was covered by every TV station. No one stopped him. No one said this is truly wrong. He's done far worse things than that. But he does exactly what he wants to do in the United States Senate, and the Republican governors support him completely on that. If you were to talk about that level of no rule of law, I do what I want to do, I am vindictive against people who are career people in the government, you would say there was a dictatorship. And because of the United States, people don't see that because there's such an aura around the U.S. being a democracy.
Yes.
But the description of how the U.S. is run now is not the description of a country running based on law, rules, not to mention human ethics or considerations of community.
Yeah. You know, we were having trouble getting Ellen before, and I think that difficulty may have been cleared up. I'm not sure. She what?
She's gone.
Okay.
She's gone.
I think she's coming on now. Ellen, can you hear us? Can you hear me? I think her mic is muted. Okay. I really wanted to get her input too. Okay, well, this is the first, what do you call this? A virtual event. It's my first event. I think it's wonderful. Thank you all for being here. But we are going to try to get Ellen on.
That's hers is an important voice.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think about when in talking about this horrendous situation. Imagine a president telling 3 states, I'm in California, the fog, the smoke, the ash that we get every day. I'm sure the hoarseness in my voice is because I went out yesterday for an hour or so. There's nothing being said by the White House, by, I won't tell you what I call him, by 45, that man, about assisting these states, Washington, Oregon, California, that are on fire and that are going to suffer horrendous health problems because of the ash. Democratic governors. He's like, I'm not, he's doing them the way he's done us with COVID-19. It's over. I'm just going to ignore them.
Yeah.
It's
unbelievable.
Amazing. It amazes me, having been in France for 23 years, how we are now in a government that can do this to the people who pay the taxes. It amazes.
Yeah, it's very frightening. It's very frightening because this is how fascist regimes come into power and then do really hideous things to the people.
Well, that the news media is even talking about what are we going to do when, not if, but what are we going to do when he refuses to leave? If Putin can't put him into office, if all of the tactics that they've used to suppress not just the black vote, but all votes. I voted from Paris for the last 23 years, proudly voted from Paris. And now he's confusing, absentee ballots and vote by mail. This is unheard of. I just keep wondering when there's going to be a run on their side. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
This actually brings to mind another passage we talked about in an earlier conversation about Audrey perhaps reading for us.
Okay.
From towards the end of the book.
I'm going to read, and then we're going to open it up to questions because I see a lot of comments running along the side. Yeah, this passage has to do with what's happening and how I see home. The old hydra of American racism, of white supremacy, has not only raised its ugly schizophrenic head again, flipping us backward, but is being fueled and led by America's president. How can my American home ever feel free again, safe again, with such a man in the White House? This is why friends who thought I never should have left home say things like, "We can't abandon our native land, bathed in the blood of our ancestors." I have to wonder what the hell they're talking about. Why would I want to stay in a land in which my ancestors were enslaved, brutalized, bathed in blood, and treated as less than human? Why would Black Americans want to stay with an abuser in a country with an ongoing history of abuse toward them, and now stay in a land run by a commander-in-chief acting like an overseer who is cracking an abuser's whip? And how is a country my ancestors were dragged to in shackles and chains my native land? Isn't it the land of the indigenous people who were already on the land before my people were brought over and forced to work it? Why would I want to stay on that land? These, of course, are the philosophical questions raised about leaving home, running from America. The practical questions have to do with leaving the land of your family and friends, language and culture, where you are the product of your history, empowered by it, even if you are often still undone by it. This is what constitutes home to me at the primal, visceral level. And this is the home I am not likely to leave for good. I am too rooted to an American badland to leave it entirely.
Powerful.
Now,
Powerful.
let's hear from the folk in cyberspace. No.
Again, we encourage all of you who've been watching, you can jump into this live stream.
Oh,
okay.
Ellen has a comment.
Just to say, I loved Audrey's book, particularly chapters 15 and 17 about the quality of French healthcare. You wrote, "They won't let us die."
The French won't let you die.
Mm-hmm.
That's a quote from Leroy Woodson, one of the profiles in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And we should mention that Ellen Hervé-Wright is one of the top nurses in France. She's trained armies of nurses in this country and has been doing incredibly courageous work throughout the course of this pandemic. So thank you, Ellen, and your colleagues and all the people you've trained.
Okay, we have some more questions up on the screen.
I just saw a question from Patrice Miles. Oh, is it feasible to retire in Paris? Do you find that the perception of America has been diminished abroad because of Trump? I would say so. I mean, let me ask that to the people who are residing there. I mean, what Trump did in less than 4 years is take the image of America as a superpower to banning. We don't want to see you Americans. We don't want you in our country. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing.
What I find most is that people sympathize with us, you know, especially people who knew me from the Obama era and everything. They come up and they're almost like, "We're so sorry. We're so sorry." You know, it's like, you know, what can we do? You know, so there's that kind of feeling. And there's a feeling of, also of not only sympathy, but of encouragement. And to the other question, yeah, you can definitely retire to Paris. That's what our friend Jim Fields did. And many people do that. It's always good to learn about the place and find out some of the, how you do everything before you come. But that's definitely feasible.
Well, Ricki and I had talked about political asylum.
I was going to beg
the French are feeling sorry for us. They might take us in.
Yeah.
I mean,
Inshallah. Any other questions? I'm looking for.
Can you speak to how the intersection of
Sky Ward? Question to Audrey Edwards. Can you speak to how the intersection of class privilege and American nationality informed your experience of being in Paris, specifically with Afro-European and the Blacks Noirs de France communities in Paris? Merci.
I can speak more to the intersection of class privilege and American nationality. What I find and what I like about the French, and everybody has a different take on this, race in France, to me, is not the overwhelming, defining feature of interactions. Mm-hmm. Yes, folks see that I'm Black, that's pretty apparent, but I don't get the feeling that, and this is from all classes, I don't get the feeling that that's what they're reacting to first. They might be reacting to my height, when I had blood red nails, but my skin color, I was never made to feel that was, whatever. Now, other people have a different take on that. And people, Black Americans love to say that the French are racist too, and I don't deny that. But what I say is what a lot of white Americans say about racism. A lot of white Americans say, well, I don't think America's racist. And you know why? Because they don't experience racism. So when I talk about, I don't think the French are racist towards me, it's coming from my personal experience. That's just how I feel. Those are my two buddies at the cafe across the street from where I live.
And Audrey, I think about a friend who is French. He's French and Ivoirian. And he was educated in the United States, was driving his BMW drop top, had his hat on backwards. The police stopped him. And he arrived at my house and he was outraged. The police stopped me. And I'm like, oh my God, did they beat you? Did they hurt you? Mm-hmm. What's wrong? What? He said, they tutoyed me. I'm like, oh, okay. Tutoyer means it is significant because you refer to people as too familiar or speaking down to a child, or vous when you're speaking to another adult, when you're speaking respectfully. And I said, when they shoot you in the head or when they, slam you up against the car, that will be awful. But for him to be tutoyé, to be referred to as tu rather than vous, was horrible.
That said, there have been some very controversial incidents in recent years. Adama Traoré, a young French Black man of African descent who died in police custody. His sister is still fighting for a full inquiry, fighting for justice in his case. There have been more incidents of that sort in recent years. And what's interesting is how French people of Black, African, Caribbean, North African backgrounds look to America for a way to protest against this. Mm-hmm. Black people have adopted the slogan "Black Lives Matter" for themselves. They chant it in English on marches. They say "Black Lives Matter." What the movement that started in our country has been an inspiration to them. I think the big paradox when it comes to racial questions is that in America, well, let's say in France, from what I've seen in my years here, institutional racism is probably a tougher obstacle to get around in this country than it is in America. There are far fewer Black French people at top universities than there are in America. There are fewer Black lawyers, Black doctors, Black business people. Yet people in their day-to-day lives are much more cool and open with each other. The paradox in America is, while you have more Black people getting into top universities and being able to create middle-class lives for themselves, there is always this sense of white supremacy lurking, always this idea of stick to your own kind. People are not comfortable with each other on a daily basis the way they are in France. But there is a movement going on in this country to open doors to people. And if you read the French press, or if you read about what's happening in France right now, there is a parallel movement going on to the same thing that's happening in America. And friends of mine, people like Rokhaya Diallo, Mabula Samora, Pap Ndiaye, they've become prominent voices at this moment of reckoning that's not just happening in America, but in France as well.
You know what, Jake? And I want to ask you this because my sense, and it's based on my very good friendship with my college roommate, my former college roommate, who was a white woman who married a Frenchman, so her children are white. And my sense that in France, it may be institutionalized racism, but it's also a very rigid structure. You know, her one daughter wanted to become a teacher. Well, it was very, very, very competitive. And the competition for what we just consider basic jobs in France seems to be very strident. So my sense is that it can be tough for anyone, certainly if you are Black, if you are from one of the African countries, it could be tougher for you. But it also seems to be tougher for the French. And I think class might play more of a factor than race. That's the debate.
Personal connections are incredibly important in French society.
American too.
Even more so than in America. It's really striking how often you meet someone who got a book published or did something or got a job because they knew somebody else. When I talk about institutional racism, there is an incredible resistance to affirmative action in this country. On the left as well as on the right. And after having had these long debates for 27 years now, trying to explain to people what affirmative action is all about, that it's not about quotas, it's about considering diversity as a value in your society. It's very hard to get that idea across sometimes. And I think there is a sort of protectiveness among French people on the right and the left, white French people, about protecting what they see as theirs, and there's a lot of resistance to opening it up. And I think people like my friends Pap and Mabula and Rokhaya are trying to crack those doors open.
I think about the organization's SOS Racism, and when we first arrived 23 years ago, they were doing things like taking a French person, an African French person, same education, background, everything, and trying to get apartments, jobs, that sort of thing. And invariably, it would always be the white French would get the job. So they were working against it. Or CRAN, Council Representative de les Associations Noires, it's like the NAACP. And they have had a hard time because the French say, oh no, we don't want to take census. We don't want to count the number of Black people, which could be to our benefit. We don't want to, they say, we do not want to be separatists. Separatism, we don't want that. But that, I understand, Jake, maybe you can speak to that. That is now what Macron is even talking about. Is that right?
Yeah. I think with all the events that are happening around the world now, there is some recognition that the French Republican ideal doesn't work for everybody. The French Republican ideal is, oh, no matter what your background, we are all French, and that is the most important thing. But I remember years ago, I was doing a workshop with some middle schoolers out in the suburbs, the concrete suburbs out here. They call them the immigrant suburbs, the banlieue. And I was in the town of Bondy. And another thing that I think is surprising for Americans, for Black Americans, when they come to France and they see the banlieue, it's not ethnically monolithic at all. Towns I know well, like Bobigny and Bondy, everybody there is poor. Sarcelles. I mean, the people there are poor, but you've got poor Africans and poor North Africans, poor Asians. There are a lot of poor Chinese in Bobigny. Eastern Europeans, Sri Lankans. The banlieue is mixed, but I'll always remember this moment in a class I was participating in. We invited a journalist originally from Morocco, Nabili, I think is his name, Nordine Nabili. You founded the Bondy blog. And there's a room full of students, 25, 13-year-olds. And at one point, Nordine just asked the kids, he said, who in this room is French? Kids looked around and certainly about 5 of the 25 hands went up. Then he said, who in this room is a foreigner? I raised my hand. I'm American. Nabili raised his hand. He's from Morocco. And then he asked, who in this room was born in France? 20 of the 25 hands shot up. And Nabili said, now, this is interesting. You were born here, but you don't know if you're French. You don't know if you're a foreigner. What are you? And this is the extent to which, despite the Republican ideal, kids are not having it driven into their heads that they are part of this country. And Nabili said, yeah, you were born here. France is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It belongs to you. And I think that idea it just needs to be reinforced.
But
to add on to that, Jake, a lot of the people from African countries focus on their own country. Like when I'm meeting an African, someone will say, that I look like I'm from the Ivory Coast, and they'll say, they'll ask me, I'm not, I don't know where I'm from. I'm from America. I don't know beyond that, Or the Cameroons, I have Cameroonian friends who identify, even though they were born here, they identify as being Cameroonian. So those kind of things happen. I see France more as a country where, okay, we as Black Americans are special. Okay, we don't encounter a normal, any kind of everyday racism. Although Blacks of African descent in the suburbs might do much more, have that encounter much more than we do, because we look like American. We walk around, we look foreign basically, even though we've been here for 30 years. But the thing I find is really the school situation that you mentioned, the idea of getting into certain schools, 3 or 4, just like really almost like in the UK, just like 3 or 4 schools, all the political class come from certain schools.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of thing is harder to get into.
Yes.
For everybody.
Right.
Kathleen, just going to make a comment.
Yeah, I can try and squeeze in. Because there was a question about nationality and Black and Afro-European. And in France, much more than the United States, you have a lot of different communities. You don't have one dominant Black skin community. And if you're talking about Black skin, you can have people who are not even African descendants here because they're Indian from India and they're Black. So the language that we use in France, because of the cultural diversity, represents different groups. And so we have to think about it in a much broader way. And also something that's really important is that in France, hierarchy. France is a very hierarchical country.
Yes, right.
And there is a hierarchy of race in France. And when you happen to be an African American, you are at the top of the Black hierarchy. And when they look at you, like French people will say to me, I'm not Black, I'm American. So I have a double identity. I have an identity of being Black, and I have an identity of being American. And when I'm in the States, my Black identity is the one that's the most important, and it's the one that I'm going to be penalized on. When I'm in France, they see Black and they see American, and that American identity takes more value. And so they're going to treat me at the status or the hierarchical level of being an American more than of being Black. And then after that, you're going to have, because the French are so interested in class, and class is money for the French. Class is schooling, class is behavior, class is the group that you were trained into. So you can be a
But Black Americans in Paris are of the middle class. Are there any poor Black Americans living in Paris?
Yes.
Are there?
Yeah.
I'm asking.
When they come to live in Paris, some of them become a lot poorer than they were.
Well, this is true, but by and large, and I say this in the book, we are not being smuggled over by boat. We're getting on a jet.
Right.
Flying over.
But you know what it is? You know what it is? I think it was Dick Gregory made the distinction between being poor and being broke. I don't think there are a lot of poor Black Americans in Paris. But there are a lot of broke.
Leroy Woodson was broke.
Okay. How about Marpessa Dawn? Or there are Black Americans who have been there broke or didn't have jobs, and the French government somehow figures out a way to support them.
Yeah.
Give them apartments. Make sure they have.
And I think that has to do with the socialized government that France is.
It's not a government. It's a government that provides a social net. And because to be socialized is a political party, and the Conservative Party and the right-wing party in France, everybody agrees about you got to have healthcare and you got to have a basic social net, which you do not have agreement about in the United States.
Right.
And I want to come back to the idea of the hierarchy of races in France, because when you get the West Indian community and then the African community and then the African community that were elite and sent to the best schools, as opposed to the African community who came over here as street cleaners, you have a real, when you see people in the street, when you go to the bank, you have being chunked into class in France much more than the States. Because in the States, you know, as someone said, how do you call a Black man with a PhD?
Don't say it.
Is a nigga. Whereas France, they're gonna say, okay, that's an African American. Okay, that's an African American who went to a great university, well dressed. So you know, and then this, that. Oh, and that's an African who looks like he's just knowing his culture and just speaking his language, and so he's at the bottom. And that changes the French reality for dealing with race also.
Yeah.
Well, another thing I say about the difference between America and France or Europe in general is the difference between slavery and colonialism. So in America, all Black people were slaves for a long time. And then after slavery, enslaved. And after slavery officially ended, there were ways of perpetuating the caste system. We're all familiar with them, and the caste system lives on in people's minds. In France, you didn't have a lot of slaves on French soil in France. They were elsewhere. They made a fortune from the slave trade. France cities like Bordeaux and Nantes were built on the slave trade. But what I find is racism is much more, what we and Americans call racism, is much more nuanced here, and it's always connected to. Can you hear me? It's always connected to France's colonial experience with different countries. So I've met North Africans who insist that they're treated worse than sub-Saharan Africans. I've met people from Senegal and Mali who think they're treated worse than people from the Caribbean. I've met people from Haiti and Guadeloupe who think they're treated worse than people from Martinique. And everybody's telling the truth. You know, it's just that their experience is connected to France's cultural baggage and how the French majority feels about people from different countries that they had to deal with in the end of in ending colonialism.
I think too about the fact that in France, or at least this has been my experience, when you meet someone, and I'll tell my guests when they come over to take the tour, you never start off a conversation by saying, so what do you do? Where do you work? That would be just like, oh, so crass. But you ask other people, where you're from? Who are your parents? You know, that, where'd you go to school? I mean, it may be not that far, but people want to know, who are you? Not what are you? And Jake, you even talked about that. The people will say, have I read anything you've written? As opposed to, what do you write?
Oh yeah, I mean, on your broader point, I mean, I've had entire dinner parties with people I never met before, and at the end of the evening, I still don't know what their profession is. Yes. And one thing that writers will tell you all the time, American writers living over here, one of the things that's so nice about the culture here is the respect for the arts in general, for writing in particular. And Audrey quotes me in her book. I say, when I meet a French person for the first time, and if my profession comes up and I tell them I'm a writer, their first question is, what do you write? When I meet an American for the first time and I tell them I'm a writer, their first question is, would I have heard of you? Because there's basically no intrinsic value to writing in the American mind.
Yeah, and it's all about celebrity.
Writer, yeah,
it's all about celebrity in America.
I mean, yeah. It's just about being a rich and famous writer. It's not about being a writer in and of itself.
We've had some great comments from people coming across here, but I have a question for all of you. Audrey, you and I are stuck here. As you said, I'm gonna ask for political asylum, but I wonder for all of you, we're gonna get back. I want Jake, Zach, Kathleen. Do you ever see yourselves living in the United States again?
No, absolutely not. Not by choice. I mean, yeah, you never say never. Something could happen, but no, I am well installed in France. Yeah.
You think Trump could require every Black American? I'm teasing. Okay. Kathleen, you have a beautiful life in that gorgeous apartment of yours. I mean, the life that you built for yourself, the professional life, and then too, that beautiful apartment that you have on Saint-Denis in the neighborhood in the 10th arrondissement.
Not the 4th. I'm sorry. Not the 4th.
Well, it's important to know the arrondissements. I always try to get people, you gotta know, because this tells you where they are. Yeah. Kathleen, do you ever see yourself coming back to the United States to live?
I suppose if, France disappeared.
Like Atlantis.
To the ocean. Okay.
I left the United States when I was 18 years old because I did not want to live on the color line. When I left because I had heard so often the United States is great, wonderful, fantastic democracy. And I could look around me and the life expectancy of an average African-American man in an urban center was that of a third world country. I can see wonderful things. I spent the first 18 years of my life in the United States. I have a lot of people that I love in the United States, but the country, the way that it is set up around race and the race line, the fact that the economic disparities and economic inequality is so accepted. The fact that there is no healthcare system and people accept it is something that has become beyond me. Because I've been here for so long. I don't understand how you can say it's a wealthy country and accept poverty and poor schools, and that the number one reason Americans go bankrupt is because they got ill.
You can't pay their medical bills, yes.
It is unacceptable to me. I don't understand Americans. When I go to the States, sometimes I get in trouble because when they say it's the world's greatest democracy, I say, based on what criteria? And people have no answer. They don't know which criteria makes it the best.
Yeah.
They just heard all their lives that it's the best. So I adore Paris.
Zachary?
I learned in your book.
Yeah.
I learned in your book, Audrey, that I'm going to age in place.
She'll never age.
Okay.
Kathleen.
No, those. That's
Listen,
good.
I'm sorry, everybody. I've got to go now. I'm gonna have to pull out of the conversation. Audrey,
thank you so
congrats on a fantastic book. I've seen some comments. My friend Diane Patrick from the States has been listening in.
I saw her. Yes,
I hope Diane,
Yes,
please
saw
spread the
Diane's
word.
comment.
Tell people to buy Audrey's book.
Diane has been so helpful to me. She's fabulous.
She's
Thank you,
fantastic, and so I just want to urge everybody watching, listening, to please order the book and have a great time reading it. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this conversation. I'm sorry.
Well, I think we're probably coming up towards wrapping it up.
Okay. Well,
okay, bye, everybody.
Bye, Jake.
Bye, Jake. Jake, you have.
She's gone.
Zach, we want to know, are you planning?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Zach.
Yeah, no. I'm going to be the one that actually breaks the chain here, because ideally, I would live both here and in the States. I would, under what conditions would I come back? I would come back as a part of the Biden administration. If I could find a job there, I would come back, and I would work for better change, because we're going to need a lot of help to clean up the 4 years of this mess we've had. So yeah, in a heartbeat.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
That's great.
That's good. Your son's in the States right now. That helps.
My son just flew back 2 weeks ago to do his senior year at Boston University. And when he starts working, he's going to do a master's, but when he starts working, he'll probably want to be based in Washington, D.C.
And remember when he was on the way? Oh, my God.
Yeah.
It tells us how old we are.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how much. I think we have like 4 minutes left, 4 or 5 minutes left.
Do you have other questions?
Are there other questions? Okay. All of you, all of you represent the most educated, artistically gifted among us. Isn't the typical Black expat a highly educated person? No. Not everybody. No.
I think we come in all kinds of experiences here. I mean, when we were at the Brothers, when we have our Brothers meetings, there'd be, some of us were writers or filmmakers, and others were, working a regular job here, So a lot of people came because they wanted to experience Paris. They wanted to get out of America. I didn't come for that reason. I came, but I wasn't one who had dreamed of Paris like a lot of my friends had. But we have people here who are, working in movers, they're working in restaurants, so, just people who decided they wanted to move, and they came here. Some stayed after the war, on the GI Bill. So, I mean, there's so many ways people get to Paris, so it's never one way.
I think expatriates, though, as a group, probably have more of an adventurous spirit. I think in some ways, it's not so much not satisfied with the status quo, just wanting to see what else there is. And for me, I've always said what I like about Paris in particular is that I can just be. And I think the early runaways tended to be the creative thinkers, the writers, the artists, the musicians. And these are the people in our culture, I think, who have what I call a renegade spirit. It's like, Kathleen, I don't want to live on the color line. You knew that very early, at 18. And I think anyone who leaves their native home wants something else, something better, whatever better represents to you.
Audrey, I wanted my then 11-year-old daughter to know what it was like to live outside of the box of racism. That was most important to me, to know that she was a Black woman walking through this world. And I shouldn't say unfortunately, we don't realize that the world is Black, brown,
people
beige.
Of color.
You go to Vietnam, and there's a new museum that honors their African past. You go to Japan, and they're talking about their African past. languages.
Right.
So it's only when in America where we're limited to this one language.
Right.
Right
well,
about
Sherry
that.
Winston is asking, were all of you fluent in French when you moved to Paris? Sherry is a jazz flautist, fabulous. She's traveled the world. I still don't speak French, Sherry. I still don't speak French, so that's my answer.
And the thing is, what's really awful is if you get here and you don't speak French, like I did not speak at all French. I had no French when I first got here. And then you have a child, you have a son, and he grows up speaking both languages, and then he laughs at your French accent.
Because you're not French accent.
At least you have a French accent.
So I learned to speak French pretty much when I got here. And I went to university here, so I got to be fluent.
I've had to learn how to speak French just to the point where I can get my guests in and out of situations.
It's very important.
It's very important.
Well, our producer is saying that we have to wrap this up, which when the party is good, you hate to leave.
You gotta have another party.
I think we better do this. I think we better do it again. Thank you, Audrey, for bringing us all together.
Thank you, Ricki. Thank you, Zachary. Thank you, Kathleen. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Ellen and Jake.
Yeah. Ellen.
I'm so happy.
I love
different things. You in your book, you put so many different things, so many different experiences that we can talk about a whole bunch of other subjects. So we should come back to other aspects of your book.
Yeah. Wait till we get back to Paris, Audrey.
Girl.
And we can go to Kathleen's house.
That's right. That's right. Thank you all, and thank you, the audience in cyberspace. Thank you. Au revoir. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Be safe.